We move immediately into another session where we welcome another speaker from Parliament, in fact from government, who I'll introduce in just a moment, and that will be followed by a panel looking at really a core theme of the conference, which is really about Australian interests, values and national identity. And so with that, let me invite our next speaker. And of course, that is the Honourable Tim Watts MP. Tim Watts is, of course, Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs and the member for Gellibrand. But Tim also, again, a long-time friend of the work of the National Security College, has a career in tech, a career outside government that I think has informed his worldview and, of course, represents one of the most multicultural electorates in the country. I'd also note that for those of you who have not enough material to read, Tim Watts's book, The Golden Country, I think is an absolute, not just a primer, but a real masterpiece on thinking about social cohesion in multicultural Australia. So it's a real pleasure to welcome the Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Honourable Tim Watts MP.
Well, thank you, Rory, for those embarrassingly generous comments. It's a great pleasure to be here at the ANU National Security College. Let me congratulate all of you on what has already been an outstanding agenda-setting conference, providing a space for a really high-quality dialogue about some of the most important issues confronting our nation today. When you become an MP, you get this sort of superpower, and that you can sort of contact experts from any field, send them a letter, say, I'm really interested in what you're doing, and they'll give you their time. It's one that I have exploited ruthlessly at the ANU, and there are many people in this room that I have imposed upon, and they have been very generous to share their expertise and their research with me. So let me begin by expressing my profuse thanks to everyone that has helped me clarify my thinking about the issues that are being discussed at this conference. Let me begin my formal remarks by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people as the custodians of the Canberra region and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Let me also extend those respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are with us here today. Foreign Minister Wong has said that foreign policy must be an accurate and authentic reflection of our values and interests, of who we are and what we want. Now, Noel Pearson, that great Indigenous leader, once said that it's impossible to tell the full story of Australia without telling three stories. The story of the ancient Indigenous heritage, which is its foundation, the British institutions built upon it, and the adorning gift of our multicultural migration. Now, Noel Pearson called these three stories the three epic strands in the grand narrative that made us one as Australians. This Australian story, our national story, is also our government's starting point for our foreign policy. The three stories that make us one as Australians inform our national values and interests and the strategic priorities that flow from them. We live in dynamic and challenging times in the Indo-Pacific. Climate change, economic disruption, shifting demographics, and geostrategic competition all have the potential to reshape the way our region operates in fundamental ways. In these times of change, Australia's strategic interests lie in an Indo-Pacific region that is peaceful, prosperous and secure, a region that operates according to agreed rules, norms and international law, where sovereignty is respected and where individual countries are free to make their own choices. Australia's interests lie in a strategic equilibrium that preserves this individual agency for countries in our region, a region where no country dominates and no country is dominated. These are our interests, but there are competing narratives for how our region should operate. Strategic competition is currently operating across multiple dimensions in the Indo-Pacific, across economic, diplomatic, strategic and military domains. The outcome of this competition will define the way our region and the broader world works. And our view is that all countries have a role to play in shaping our region and contributing to the regional balance that preserves the ability for nations, large and small, to make their own choices. Now, the Albanese government isn't content to be a mere spectator to these dynamics shaping our region. We seek to influence them. So we're investing in the sources of our national power, and we're deploying all the tools of Australian statecraft to this end: diplomatic, defence, economic, development. In the diplomatic sphere, we seek to shape our region by working bilaterally with alliance partners, multilaterally through groupings like the Quad, and through regional organisations, particularly ASEAN. Working with others, bilaterally, multilaterally, regionally, requires us to be influential beyond our borders. And in this context, there are strong connections between our sovereignty, our citizens, and our state, between our national identity and our international influence. The epic story of Australia that Noel Pearson describes isn't just our starting point for thinking about the kind of world that we want to live in, it's also a source of influence for us in the challenge of working with others to build it. Australia's 65,000 years of Indigenous and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, the oldest continuous culture in the world, is the foundation of our First Nations foreign policy. That is work being led by Justin Mohammed, our inaugural Ambassador for First Nations people. And centering First Nations perspectives and practices in our engagement with the world gives us a powerful platform for sharing and learning from First Nations experiences, while also building common ground between Australia and the 90 nations in the world with Indigenous peoples, particularly across the Blue Pacific. And I've seen this firsthand at the Organisation for American States. When talking about First Nations foreign policy, gives a different dimension with our engagement with South American countries. Australia's multicultural identity is another powerful source of insight and influence for our engagement with the world. Today, half of Australians are either born overseas or have a parent born overseas. And that means that anyone in any corner of the world can look to Australia and see something of themselves reflected. It also means that we can look within our own nation and find a point of connection, a point of understanding with anyone from anywhere in the world. This is particularly true of our own region, where our demography links us just as strongly to the Indo-Pacific as our geography. Our identity of modern Australia is now a powerful source of insight and influence. I often think of how far we've come in this respect. In his book Stranded Nation, historian David Walker, that great chronicler of Australian attitudes towards Asia, tells the story of the Australian government's Asian Visitors Program of the 1950s. In the 1950s, the Australian government brought journalists and influential figures from across the region to Australia in an effort to positively influence regional perceptions of our country. They were in the influence business. Consider how difficult that would have been at this time. Of the nation's 176 diplomatic officers, David records that there were just 6 Chinese language speakers, 6 Japanese speakers, 3 Malay speakers, and 2 Bahasa speakers. There was a solitary Urdu speaker and a solitary Bengali speaker. No speakers of Thai, Burmese, Korean, or Tamil. Levels of Asian literacy in the general community were even lower. And in this context, first-hand accounts of these Asian visitor programs of the time are amusing. They're also deeply revealing of the prevailing level of Australian ignorance of our region at that time. David writes about how host Australians of these Asian visitor programs, quote, thought they would surprise and delight their visitors by serving something Asian to eat. For the well-meaning Anglo-Australians of the 1950s, Asian food meant curry. Unfortunately, David writes, quote, when one of the host's wives prepared a Malayan version of this dish for her visitors from across the entire Indo-Pacific, no member of the visiting party was able to identify what it was. Today, we can look back at this with horror. Thanks to decades of multicultural migration, Australia's culinary competence is in the present day a source of great regional soft power. Australian MasterChef is known across the region, particularly in India. And Australians of Malaysian, Chinese, Filipino, Indonesian, Nawari, Sri Lankan, Bangladeshi, and Fijian Indian heritage have been some of the show's highest profile contestants, and they are known in the region, I can tell you. It might sound trivial, but I can tell you that this matters. It's not a substitute for our efforts in other domains of statecraft, but it matters to these efforts. It matters to the way people in the region see Australia, and it matters to our ability to engage with them. There's nothing better in my work as Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs than sitting across the table from someone, than meeting someone who feels connected to Australia in some way through our people. Moreover, feels an admiration for a society in which people from all backgrounds can thrive and succeed. Put simply, the more people who in our region who know modern Australia, who know the three stories of modern Australia, the more influential we can be with them. But while all of us here live in the thriving success of Australian modern multiculturalism, the story of modern Australia hasn't permeated through the region. While our people-to-people connections have grown enormously in recent decades, there are still plenty of people in the region who have never lived in Australia or known an Australian. Within these groups, outdated stereotypes of Australia and what it means to be Australian still persist. That's not surprising. For most of our history, we only told the world one of the stories of what it means to be Australian. So too often in the region, for example, successful Asian Australians are seen as exceptions to the Australian identity rather than the true representatives of it that they are. Preconceptions haven't caught up with the modern Australia. And breaking these stereotypes is hard and requires deliberate effort. And that's why we talk about explicitly projecting modern Australia as being a part of our foreign policy. This requires actively elevating parts of the Australian story that haven't been told in the past as part of our engagement with the world. The best way to do this is by showing rather than telling, by ensuring that Australians who represent all parts of our national story are embodied in our statecraft. And the Albanese government has sought to do this through our political leaders' engagement with the region, through our diplomatic representatives, and through our public diplomacy. Now, while we have work to do, the 47th Australian Parliament is the most diverse in our history. Alongside more Indigenous representatives than ever before, the current Australian Parliament includes representatives with cultural heritage from Laos, India, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, Malaysia, China, and Vietnam. It includes the first Australian senator to be sworn in on a copy of the Bhagavad Gita and the first Australian senator to wear a hijab in the Senate. The Albanese government includes 2 ministers of the Islamic faith and 1 minister of the Jewish faith. And this elected diversity is a powerful resource for showing modern Australia to the world, and we utilise it with visitors to our country and with our outbound engagement. There are too many examples of this to share. But there is, of course, no greater embodiment of this power of representation to change perceptions than our Foreign Minister, Penny Wong. It's a powerful thing for an Australian Foreign Minister to be able to visit Malaysia and record a message for social media in Bahasa Melayu, declaring that Southeast Asia is a region that I know well, it's a region that I am from. Of course, our day-to-day engagement in the world is done by the staff of our embassies and our posts around the world, not by political leaders. So ensuring that our diplomatic corps fully represents the true story of modern Australia matters to Australian influence. I've greatly benefited from the frank engagement that I've been able to have with members of DFAT's called network on this challenge. We've still got work to do on this front, but I've been able to see the promise of it and the potential of this in action firsthand. My friend Ridwan Jadwat is one of the most powerful advocates for the way that diversity in our modern diplomatic corps can show the diversity of modern Australia. His personal story is a powerful one. His family left apartheid-era South Africa when he was 9 years old, and the first Anglo-Australian that he met was a DFAT officer in processing his family's diplomatic immigration claim. Ridwan became the first Muslim Australian migrant to serve as an Australian ambassador when he was appointed as ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Oman, Bahrain and Yemen in 2018. And he's now our ambassador to the United Arab Emirates, where I caught up with him last week. Ridwan has spoken about the power of his personal story in his day job. He said that inevitably, when you become a head of a mission, people overseas see you as the highest representative of Australia. You represent 25 million people. You become a symbol of our country. You become part of a bigger story about Australia. Saudis and Bahrainis and Omanis still come up to me and say, we had no idea that an Australian ambassador could look like you. Ridwan is a living embodiment of modern Australia that's far more powerful than any speech a minister could give. But of course, projecting modern Australia beyond our shores isn't just a matter for politicians and diplomats. Australian diplomats are constantly finding creative ways to tell our Australian story to the region, like when Australian diplomats screamed bluey in Vietnamese to thousands of fans in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City recently. But the most powerful exemplars of modern Australia are those Australians from diverse backgrounds who have achieved international recognition in their fields. Extraordinary Australians with heritage from the region, like James Wan, Jason Day, Anne Curtis Smith, Terence Tao, Rose Park, Akira Isagawa, Chungwa Gu, and Ako Kondo, all internationally recognised stars, both in their areas of expertise and across our region. And the success of these great Australians changed perceptions of our country in the region. You only need to watch videos of Australians accepting awards at K-pop awards ceremonies with unexpectedly thick Australian accents to see Korean K-pop fans' preconceptions of what it means to be an Australian changing in real time. Australian diplomats routinely work to put a spotlight on the success of these Australians as Australians. So it's no small thing when Australian Ambassador to the Philippines, HKU, secured a Filipino-Australian actor, singer, mega celebrity, Anne Curtis Smith, as the host of Manila Embassy's Australia Day event. Those with Filipino heritage in the audience will know how significant that is. Showing, rather than telling, the guests what it means to be an Australian today. I don't hide my pride in the nation that we have become. But across the three stories of modern Australia, we face challenges that threaten to undermine not only the success of this society at home, but our influence abroad. We must address the continuing stain on our nation that is the gap between outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and the broader Australian community. We must ensure that the diversity of our community is truly represented in the institutions of power in our society, particularly in leadership roles in these institutions. We must ensure that foreign interference does not undermine the ability of members of Australia's diaspora communities to participate fully in our democracy as equal Australian citizens. And finally, we need to preserve the social cohesion, our unity as Australians, between and within the three stories that make us one. It's no secret that the conflict in Gaza is posing a greater challenge to this cohesion than we've seen in decades. As a diverse, pluralistic nation, Australians hold a range of complex and conflicting views on the conflict in Gaza. As the Foreign Minister has said, what unites us is respect for each other and our right to live in peace. And given the appalling human suffering we've seen since Hamas' terrorist attack on October 7, it's no surprise that many of the views held by Australians on this conflict are deeply felt and strongly held. Unfortunately, the politics of division reward those who seek to highlight differences between our citizens rather than to build on what we have in common as Australians. And social media algorithms reward conflict and extreme rhetoric over efforts to build understanding and cohesion. These dynamics are corrosive for our social cohesion. Australians are deeply concerned for the harmony of their schools, their workplaces, and the communities in which they live during this current conflict. Community leaders and Australian citizens have an obligation to model how to navigate genuinely held and deeply felt differences of views in our community in a way that preserves individual respect and community cohesion. Politicians, however, play an outsized role in ensuring that conflict abroad does not turn into divisions at home. As the Foreign Minister has said in her address to the gala dinner of this conference last night, there are too many politicians in Australia who are manipulating legitimate and heartfelt community concern for their own ends. So I call on politicians from all sides to do everything they can to maintain our social cohesion. It's bigger than all of us. Together, we need to encourage Australians to engage with each other with empathy, not contempt, to be curious about different perspectives, not judgmental, to do more listening and less shouting. Australians take great pride in the success of our multicultural society. In this moment, we need to work together to preserve it. When describing the three stories that make us one as Australians, Noel Pearson described the Australian story as one of the great epic stories of this planet. And with any epic, it hasn't been plain sailing. We weren't perfect at Federation, and we're not perfect now. As Pearson put it, our history is replete with shame and pride, failure and achievement, fear and love, cruelty and kindness, conflict and comity, mistake and brilliance, folly and glory. We will not shy from its truth. We've made terrible mistakes as a nation in the past. For too long, we suppressed and denied 2 of the 3 stories that make us one as Australian. And we still have so much work to do to realise our full potential as a nation and to truly bring together the 3 stories that make us one. But our ability to change for the better as a democratic society, as an open society, is Australia's most powerful example to the world. Our ability to recognise our mistakes and set a new course, to be a greater country in the future than we were in the past. And that's not just a job for politicians, it's a job for all of us as Australians. It matters for our success as a nation here in Australia. It also matters for our influence beyond our borders. We have a great story to tell to the world, but it's an unfinished story, a living story. The way that it unfolds is the responsibility of each of us as Australians. To quote Noel Pearson one last time, it's up to all of us to ensure that our storylines entwine further together each generation. Thank you.